in John 6, we get to this loaves and fishes miracle. Remember last week I said if I was going to give it a title other than it being the fourth miracle, I would have said poolside preacher. And then when I was in Phoenix this week, there was a really nice courtyard at the hotel with a really nice pool and hot tub. And I had to work the whole time. I didn't get any time at all to be. I was like, I will do this for Jesus. I will go out there and sit in the hot tub and then see who's around to preach to. But I didn't even get time. But this week, if I was going to give us a title, it would be Thanksgiving Leftovers. Because Jesus provides in this miracle in abundance, right? So that there's excess and there are Thanksgiving leftovers. But we've covered the 3 sign miracles so far. I like the 10 Commandments series before. I don't want you to forget, so I like to build on these every week. But the first week was Jesus turned water into wine. And you remember what was significant there is that he involved or informed only his inner circle. The disciples knew, and then some staff people knew, the back of house, the servants. So he was kind of a lower level sort of miracle. And then all of a sudden he goes to the nobleman's son. And the nobleman, what was really significant there is that he wasn't even a believer. He was just out of desperation asking somebody that he heard had some superpowers. So he wasn't even a believer, and Jesus did a healing for them. Then he became a believer. He was on his way to becoming a believer. And also what was significant there is that he did that miracle remotely. He just spoke it. So it kind of clued us into the omnipresence of Jesus. He doesn't have to be physically there and do something. So that's a godly characteristic that we saw in Jesus. And so he went to high level, upper crust, non-believer, and remote. So a whole bunch of things about his mission and his nature were revealed. Then last week, the healing by the pool at Bethesda. And he heals someone who, as we read the story and went on last week, for all practical purposes, seems to have been not all that grateful. Not necessarily responding the way that we would have liked. And it raised theological questions about sickness and healing that he doesn't answer, because God doesn't have to answer all the questions for us, and therefore he didn't. And it raised more questions than it answered. And also, he went public and high profile. He went into a place that was crowded, full of people during a feast time, did a miracle, did something on the Sabbath that challenged the Pharisees' legalistic Sabbath rules and brought their attention, which he knew was going to accelerate his path to the cross. So all 3 of these, completely different stories so far. And guess what today is? A completely different kind of story. So John is showing us some really different parts of Jesus and his character and his nature. So today he feeds 5,000 with what seems to be a sack lunch or a family lunch. When you read the other Gospels, sometimes you'll see 4,000. You read John's and you see 5,000. I don't think that an exact number matters. I don't think that one of those was the exact number and the other one is somehow incorrect. Nobody was there taking attendance. I don't think that everyone had an app where they checked in that they were at this event. So, and I don't think there was somebody with one of those little clickers counting people when they came in through a gate. No idea. Thousands of people were there. Also, many scholars read into this and say when they say 4,000, 5,000, they're probably only counting men. So maybe there's families with them. So maybe it's 12,000, maybe it's 15,000. The number is obviously not the most important piece. What Jesus does with them is the most important piece. So, John chapter 6, as we often do, I want to read through the whole thing once. I try without interruption. And then we'll go back and we'll pull it apart a little bit, okay? So, John chapter 6, verse 1. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already knew what he had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountainside by himself. There you go. Pretty great story, isn't it? So like many of these, I think we would probably say, I've read this story or heard this story dozens of times, some hundreds of times. Maybe if you've been in church your whole life, thousands of times, you feel like you've heard or read this story. So, like so many of these, I want to slow it down for us for a minute and really think about what's going on. We have a family of 7 with our adopted intern daughter Holly. We have 8. If we're all going to go anywhere, it takes longer than one person deciding they're going to go somewhere, right? If any one of us decides, I'm out of here, I'm going someplace, they can be through the doorway, grab the car keys, and gone in a moment. If 8 of us are going, it could be an hour from the time we say, I'm out of here, to when we walk out the door. So what about 100 or 200 or 500 or 1,000 people or 4,000 people or 12,000 people? How long does it take to get that group of people moving? How long does it take for a crowd like that to gather and to assemble? How long does it take for a crowd like that to pass a message through a crowd like that? Just think through some of these things. Think about a concert or an event or a stadium or a fair or some sort of event that you've been to, and especially if it's an outside event. And imagine it with no sound system, with no signs, no stanchions, no porta potties, imagine it without anything that would have been done today if we're planning a large-scale event with thousands of people. And try to get your brain around a minimum of 4,000 and maybe up to 10 or 12,000 people converging on a place. Now, if you think about a festival like Woodstock, where it was a little unexpected that many people came. Now, there were some different things going on there that made that a particularly chaotic event. But when thousands of people just converge on a place, I think that could be a little overwhelming. I think it could be a little bit unexpected, crazy. What do we do with this? Right? I'm going to try to make a case for you today that this is the longest and slowest miracle that Jesus ever does. Certainly of those recorded, by far. Think about everything else that he does that's miraculous, whether it's a healing or a walking on water, a calming a storm, healing someone remotely. Whatever it is, think of all the miraculous things that you've heard about Jesus. And they're things that essentially happen in a few moments. Now, I really challenged us a few weeks ago with the water to wine to stretch out and walk through that whole process that may have taken an hour or two to go and get all the water and fill all the ceremonial jars and all that was involved with that. But this is a big, slow motion, several hours sort of, wow, event that takes place. We're talking about thousands of people. We don't have 50 people with event staff shirts running around, with walkie-talkies and radios communicating, and we don't have that. Verses 1 through 9. Let's just take the first part, and I want to I want to just slow it down and walk through a little bit what this looks like. So, sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That is the Sea of Tiberias. So I can only get that far, and I want to give you like geographical background. So Jerusalem, Israel, Galilee region, over here where Jesus lives. Okay, see that area right there? Imaginary with the hand right there. Okay, now there's the Sea of Galilee right here, which is shaped like kind of a harp, like a big sort of harp sort of shape. He says he went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. That's over here. See this right here? This region on the other side? This region is full of Greek and Roman territory. It's called the Decapolis. There's Greek and Roman developments over there. Roman soldiers occupy it. It's where the armies would kind of camp out and settle. Depending on how you put the Gospels together and what you read when and where, it looks like there's a chronology where Jesus, when he does the calming the storm on the way across the sea, and then when he gets to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, he casts the demons out of the demon-possessed man in the caves and sends them into the pigs, and the pigs go down into the sea. All that happened right over here on the west side, over on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So Jesus kept going over there across the sea and doing ministry in that region. And so some people argue that this story happens when he goes back over there because a whole bunch of people from his side of the Sea of Galilee is really more like a really big lake. So the Sea of Galilee, they follow him across. So tons of people go across or go around because they heard he's going there. And then huge crowds gather from over there because every time he's gone over there, he's done crazy, miraculous things. So a lot of people argue this story happens later on because it says he went back to the far side of the Sea of Galilee. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. Now, when you're in Jesus' Galilee region, you go across the sea, and then you go over here, there's hills. And the hills slope right down into the sea. Big, nice, beautiful, kind of rolling, low mountains. And it says when Jesus went over there, he went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. So Jesus goes over to the other side of the sea, and he's up there on the hillside. Now, we just read that as Jesus went over there, and then he went up on the hillside. As if all of that happened in 20 minutes, right? Gets in a motorboat, and they swim really fast across the sea, and then they get on a gondola that jumps up the... No. Slow that part down, because that may have been a day, and it gave plenty of time for crowds of people to hear and know that he was going that direction and decide to follow. And it gave plenty of time for the people up and down the Decapolis on the west side of the Sea of Galilee to hear that Jesus had come ashore and to start to gather. What I'm trying to say is that this crowd of thousands of people didn't gather in 10 minutes. There was no news, there was no radio, there was no internet communicating where Jesus was. Jesus went over there, and he very likely camped out for a while and decided he was going to spend some time there and do some ministry. And word gets out, and people are gathering, and a crowd is gathering. And somebody's doing this. Do you know where he went? Did you hear? I heard he went up by those hills. I heard he went up past where he healed the demon-possessed man. I heard he went up that way. And so people are starting to go. The crowds are gathering. Maybe the disciples went and told people because Jesus wanted them to come or wanted them to know where he was. Maybe they just found out. We're not given that. But it takes place over a little bit of time. Minimum, many hours. I think more likely a day or two. So this crowd starts coming in, and Jesus is up here on a hillside. It says, when Jesus looked up, and he saw a great crowd coming toward him. So Jesus... I have this vantage point, having stood up on that hillside before, looking down over the Sea of Galilee and that whole valley where that story happens and the herds of pigs, and that Jesus is up there where he has a little bit of a bird's eye view. And he's just seeing, over the course of hours, just the crowds and crowds, and they keep coming. Boats of people are coming across the water. Tons of people are coming from the north. Maybe people are coming up from the south through the Decapolis. Excuse me. Jesus sees this big gathering happening. His disciples see this huge gathering happening. They're in a place where they can watch this. And Jesus says, And when you read each of the Gospels, by the way, I just went through in the last 24 hours and just read the story in each of the other Gospels. And all the wording is a little different, or how he asks the question and how they answer it. But essentially, he kind of says to the disciples, boy, we got a little bit of a situation here. So there's a lot of people. And if we want them to stick around for a long time, and I want to give them all kinds of teaching, seems like the right thing to do, a hospitality thing, would be that we have food for everyone. So what should we do? And again, when you put together all four Gospels, you get various accounts of them saying, there's no way, and it would take 8 months, like we need a year's wages, or 8 months of wages to feed this crowd of people. Like, it's just not doable. It's not possible. So Jesus says, okay. But it says, John's the only one that says he's asking them to test them. But a couple of them indicate that he already kind of has a plan. Of course he has a plan, right? Does Jesus do anything sort of that he stumbled into or fell into? I don't think so. He has a plan. So he says, what should we do? And this is kind of a big problem. And they say there's no way. And then various accounts just say that they came up with, or the disciples among them had these loaves and fishes. John's the only one that says that they found a boy who had some food, but somebody had a little bit of food, like just one family that planned and brought food. Maybe some others had a little. It doesn't say nobody else there had any food, but nobody else there had food to feed thousands of people. But somebody brought their little bit of food, okay? And the disciples say, we've got this little bit of food, but this isn't going to help. This might be enough for us to not starve for the next day and a half. But it's not going to help thousands of people. And this is where I just wish that we could see and hear how Jesus has these conversations with them. Just based on his character and God's character, we know that God's loving, but there were times where it seemed that Jesus had some fun with people. I mean, that comes through in the scriptures. There are times where Jesus is sarcastic. There are times where he says things that are a little funny. There are times where Jesus seems to enjoy kind of blowing people's minds. And how do you think he responded when he healed somebody and they jumped up and were dancing around? Do you think Jesus was like, I can't celebrate with you because I'm God? No, like, Jesus didn't have a British accent, and a bow tie. Like, if Jesus healed somebody and they were jumping around dancing, I'm pretty sure Jesus was jumping around dancing. Look at you, go! Like, yes. Like, he's a lovable rabbi. He's a lovable teacher, and he seems to have fun. So he says to the disciples, and John records it this way, that Jesus asks them a question, but he already knows what he's going to do. Where I'm from, we call that messing with somebody. Like, I'm just messing with you. You're like, what should we do? And they're like, well, this is all we have, and this wouldn't be nearly enough. And I picture Jesus saying something. This is not the text, okay? I picture Jesus being like, remember that wedding? They were out of wine. We thought that was a big problem. It wasn't. It was nothing. Watch what I do with this one. Check this out. Like, watch. And the disciples had seen him do some things where I do not know how this might unfold or what's going to happen here. But just watch. So my notes here actually say at the bottom of the page, wink/smile. I picture Jesus with remember that wedding? With a wink and a smile. Remember that? And I just feel like they knew, okay, he's going to do a thing. Because he's not at all worried about the situation. So, picking up in verse 10. So Jesus replied, have the people sit down. And this is when they know he's going to do a thing. Right? Jesus has done this stuff before. Remember the water to wine miracle? Mary turns around and says, do whatever he tells you to do. And then she goes to sit down and watch what happens. So Jesus, they're like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what we're going to do. And Jesus says, have the people sit down. Get ready. And so, let me just say this. If there are between 4,000 and 12,000 people gathered around, crowded into a valley, do you just tell everyone to sit down? And instantly 4,000 people heard that and sat down? No. How do you even tell 4,000 people to sit down? In biblical times, with no sound systems, was there less noise pollution? Yes, so a voice could have carried a little better. And they were by the water. But to tell 4,000 people to sit down, hey, everybody sit down, everybody sit down. And then the next guy, maybe they've got disciples staggered through the crowd. Maybe the disciples are spreading out. Maybe the disciples pick one of the disciples they don't like as much that day and make him be the runner. But they're sending people through the crowd saying, tell everyone, Jesus said to sit down. I think we're going to have food, but we don't know where it is. But I think maybe, but he says sit down. So they're passing this message through the crowd. And groups of people start sitting down, and people that are there with their kids running around are telling their kids, hey, come on over and sit down. And kids are running around in the grass, picking flowers and getting stung by bees. And families are, everybody's, sit down, everybody. There's a little process going, and it gets quiet. There was plenty of grass in that place. And all the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. Again, giving cause to, is he just saying 5,000 men and then their families are on the fringes? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. This is where I think we are looking at the longest and slowest miracle. If I were to say, I've got a loaf of bread here and a fish, and I'm going to break them up into pieces for this group, it's going to take 3 or 4 minutes. If there were 300 or 400 people, and I'm going to sit at this little table here and break up some loaves and pieces of fish, and what am I putting them in? I don't know. Am I putting them in hands? Am I putting them... I don't know. We hear later that he says, go get bushel baskets, so maybe people have brought some baskets along. Maybe he's taking pieces of fabric. Maybe somebody took a cloak. Like, have you ever just tried to envision this? What happened over the next hour? And the beauty of it is, I don't know. And you can't know, but it is okay to think about it. And to just try to imagine it, because there's no way that you can imagine it and not be in awe. What happened? And here's a question. As Jesus is breaking the bread, is it multiplying in his hands? As he breaks apart a little loaf of barley bread, right? As he breaks it apart and reaches over and hands it to somebody to when he reaches back, is it whole again? Is the bread growing back like a starfish grows back a limb really fast every time he moves his hands? Does he keep reaching in the bag, and every time he reaches in the bag that has 5 loaves in it, he reaches in that bag 600 times and there's a loaf each time? Or when he breaks it up and he gives it to the disciple to go pass on, every time they pass it to the next person, is it multiplying on a plate or in a... Like, I don't know. When, where, how do these loaves and fishes turn into enough to feed thousands of people? Like, I would love to hear, there's 20-some people in the room, every one of you tell me what your imagination gives you for how or when or where does that happen? And at some point, don't you think the disciples are like, how is he doing that? Where is he getting that? Are they not watching? Are they not trying to figure it out? Are other people not gathering and say, how fast is word spreading through the crowd that the great teacher is making food out of nothing? How is that spreading through the crowd? How fast is it spreading through the crowd? How confused are the people? How excited are they? Do you think they're trying to gather? He's doing what? No, he really is. He's been up there for 20 minutes and he's still breaking bread and it just kind of keeps appearing. If I was 800 people back in that crowd, would be trying to get up near that table. Wouldn't you? What's going on up there? You wouldn't? No, you're like, I don't know. I'm not going to fight the crowd. It's bread. You like bread. And I would want to know, what is happening? How does Jesus just You got the answer? How's he do it, Ted? Oh, you're just stretching. Man, I thought I was going to finally get the answer. Raise your hand right at the right time. I'm like, I thought he was going to tell me. I've wondered this my whole life. It's a long, slow, unfolding miracle. And as that makes it harder to get my brain around, it also makes it more awesome. It gives credibility to the miracle, not raises question to the miracle. By the way, there are all kinds of modern scholars out there that preach there was no miracle whatsoever. I left a church once. I was, as you know, I do music, and I used to do music in some Sunday churches. And I went to a church once, and I had done music for them for 6 or 7 weeks, and I knew they were a pretty liberal church, but you know, the guy seemed nice enough, and I was doing music for them, and he preached on this story. And he said, obviously, no one could just break bread and break fish, and it just keeps appearing and is enough to feed thousands of people. Like, obviously, nobody would believe that. That's crazy stuff. So the miracle is that when this one boy offers his food, it so inspired the crowd that they all took out the food they were hiding and decided to share it. And that was the miracle that happened here. And I was like waiting for him to say he was kidding, but he wasn't. And then he went on to preach his social gospel message about how we all just need to learn from Jesus. What Jesus was trying to tell us is not to withhold, but to really share. And then he gave a pitch because it was a church full of millionaires for them to give some money for something. And then I shook his hand at the end and said, keep the check for today. I won't be back. Because that's heresy. Because you're crazy. Jesus did a miracle. Jesus turned the world upside down. That's why we're all here 2,000 years later. It's why the calendar shifted. It's why the greatest nation in the world rewrote their history and their religion and changed. Jesus did a miracle. And the fact that this happens over hours with thousands of people doesn't make it less likely. It makes it more amazing. Because there's no way this story stands the test of time unless thousands of people were there to say, yes, that happened. How it happened, we have no idea because he's God. And that's exactly what John is trying to communicate to us. Long, slow unfolding miracle with plenty of opportunity for plenty of people to see and observe what he's doing. In verse 12, wrapping up the story, when they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the miraculous sign that Jesus did, they began to say, surely this is the prophet that is to come into the world. Jesus, knowing they intended to make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Now, there's several things in there. First of all, is the leftovers. Thanksgiving leftovers. Now, this story actually seems much more likely if you've ever had big Thanksgiving gatherings, because somehow there's like 2 casseroles and a little bag of potatoes and a turkey, and at the end of the meal, and everybody's trying to put food away, you need 2 refrigerators for these like 85 compartments of leftovers. How does that happen? It seems like after Thanksgiving dinner, there's 4 times as much food as there was before Thanksgiving dinner. So maybe that's the little glimpse for us of the loaves and fishes miracle, is that we need 2 refrigerators for leftovers. But he has 12 bushels, 12 baskets of leftovers, and a whole bunch of significance there. Is this enough for the 12 disciples? So that each one of them has food that they can take away and they understand his provision? Is it the 12 tribes of Israel? Is that he's got enough to provide to everybody and this is going to reach out to the whole world? There's all kinds of things in there. But the point is there were a whole bunch of leftovers. So they started with this much food and they have this much left over after thousands of people have been fed. It's pretty great. And thousands witness, and it's a huge miracle, and thousands of people were in awe. How could they not be? And of course, then Jesus realizes at the end of this miracle, remember the end of the last miracle, he ticked off the Pharisees. So he lit the fuse at the end of the last miracle John records, where the Pharisees are now after him and want him gone, want him disciplined, want him punished, more likely dead. And now in this one, he's lit the fuse with a crowd where thousands of people are now ready to say, he's our Messiah. We've got to make him king. And Jesus withdraws and gets out of there quick so that he can let the hype settle a little bit. But he knows what he's doing, doesn't he? He just let thousands of people see and know, because he's expanding the scope and the reach. Started with his disciples and the servants at the wedding miracle. Moved to a nobleman and somebody as an insider with Herod's group. And then it moved to the Pharisees and all the people gathered in Jerusalem for a festival and a temple. And then he moves to a mass event. Jesus is unfolding something, and we get to see it. When I thought about this, I thought back to our Ten Commandments series that we just finished a while ago on using the Lord's name in vain and talking about all the different names of God. And one of those was Jehovah Jireh, right? The Lord will provide, or the Lord my provider. And I think that's, aside from the miracle and the revelation to thousands, what was Jesus communicating about himself and about the character and nature of God in this? He's a sufficient provider. In fact, he can take nothing and make it into more than anybody needs and have leftovers. He is Jehovah Jireh. He is our provider. And that brought to mind that old song. Do you remember the old song, Jehovah Jireh, my provider's grace is sufficient for me? You know that song? You know that song? Good. You know that song. And it goes on to say, my God will supply all my needs according to his riches and glory. And that's out of Philippians. Philippians chapter 4, verse 19. And Paul was thanking the people at the end of Philippians for their giving and their support of the ministry and all those things. And he says to them, as a prayer and a blessing that he speaks back to them, he says, and my God will provide all your needs according to his riches in glory. And I always read that passage, by the way, and I thought it meant my God will provide all your needs according to his riches in glory. Like where he is, he has a lot, so he can provide everything you have. That's true. But what that actually, when you pick apart just that one verse, I got sidetracked with that this week. When you pick apart just that one verse, he's saying, my God will provide all your needs according to what he has, and he'll do it in glorious ways. Now I want to preach a whole sermon on that verse, because that's really cool. Because he's saying, my God can provide all that you need, and that according to his riches and glory, he has riches, and he will convey it to you in glorious ways. And when you understand that that's what Paul was writing, you understand all the other ways that God provides for us. Right? The cross became glory. It was shameful. It became glorious because God provided our needs according to his riches, what he had, and he did it in a glorious way. It didn't look glorious, he made it glorious. He showed sacrifice as the ultimate love. He did something crazy because the cross, he dies and he's buried and it seems final, and then it's not. He makes it glorious. And he says, I'm not dead and you don't have to be either. According to his riches and in glorious ways, God will provide what you need. I think Jesus demonstrated that in this miracle. I have everything that you need, and I have it according to my riches, not what you bring, and I will provide everything you need and then some, and I will do it in glorious ways. That is not a prosperity gospel that I'm preaching. That is the hope and the love and the grace and the mercy of Jesus. You and I need saving. God says, I have a way for that. And out of my riches, I can provide it. I can sacrifice for you. I can love you. I can do it in glorious ways. And then every other need you have in life, can you trust that God will provide what you need according to his riches and even in glorious ways? God will show up and God will provide what we need. He'll take care of us. He's proven it over and over. And I think the miracle is a great warm-up to what Jesus does on the cross. It says, let me provide for you